My name is Henry Wang Yao. I'm the founder and president of Center for China and Globalization. It's been 15 years since CCG has been established. How time flies. I remember in 2008 when Beijing was holding Beijing Olympic. The slogan then was "One World, One Dream." That exactly symbolized the globalization. And we found it was really a great time and occasion to establish our think tank, Center for China and Globalization, CCG. Now 15 years has passed. CCG has become a leading Chinese think tank. And also we are now one of the top 100 top think tank in the world. And also we are the only think tank that has been granted special consultant status by the United Nations. So the motto for CCG is that global vision for China and Chinese wisdom for the world. So we strive to be a leading think tank for building a bridge between China and the outside world. We really seek to communicate, seek to hear, but also seek to understand. And also we want to tell the story of China to the outside world. And CCG also launched the Global Young Leader Dialogue, which has been welcomed by young leaders and young talents from around the world. President Xi actually wrote a letter to our program and highly praised this program and wants to invite more global young talent come to China to take a look. We are now living a very complex and very challenging world. I mean, we are now in the 21st century, but the human being has met unprecedented challenges of climate change and also pandemic, and also, of course, the geopolitical risk. But I think it's important that to have a think tank to really think globally and act locally, and also the think tank has to really have a vision. So I think for CCG, our future vision is really to build up this bridge to connect China and the world, to really be a global communicator, a global bridge builder, and a global dialogue platform. Globalization is a mega trend, and we are now facing deglobalization and the globalization setbacks. But I believe globalization is the trend, and globalization will continue and will be more inclusive, more sustainable, with concerted efforts of all the players, of all the countries, that we have to work together. And CCG can work with others, with all the international community and international think tank community to really support globalization and develop globalization so we can make a globalization a better future for the world.
My great pleasure to introduce CCG Secretary General, Dr. Mabel Miao.
Your Excellencies, Ambassadors, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Center for China and Globalization and the China and Globalization Forum. CCG has hosted this signature conference in the past 7 years in a row since 2015, have engaged with hundreds of participants from across China's policy, experts, and business communities. The 8th edition is a special one due to pandemic. We are honored to host so many ambassadors here at CCG for Ambassadors Roundtable. Many of you may be familiar with the setting here, as you have previously joined our Ambassador Series Roundtable. Today, we are poised to present an extraordinary event focusing on global mobility and economic recovery issue in the post-pandemic time. It's my great honor and privilege to introduce our speakers of honor. First, allow us to extend our appreciation to Ambassador Lin Songtian, President of the Chinese People's Association of Friendship with Foreign Countries and former Chinese Ambassador of South Africa, for your support. Thank you. Next, allow me to acknowledge the presence of ambassadors from 20 countries. They are His Excellency Rahat Matala Osman, Permanent Representative of African Union to China. His Excellency Graham Fletcher, Ambassador of Australia to China. His Excellency Paulo Estevalic Macuta, Ambassador of Brazil to China. His Excellency Dario Mihelin, Ambassador of Croatia to China. His Excellency Nicholas Chopius, Ambassador of European Union to China. His Excellency Laurent Billy, Ambassador of France to China. His Excellency Johari Orientamangam, Ambassador of Indonesia to China. His Excellency Luka Ferrari, Ambassador of Italy to China. His Excellency Raja Dato Yushua Abedan, Ambassador of Malaysia to China. Her Excellency Clary Foley, Ambassador of New Zealand to China. Her Excellency Sunny Brodesit, Ambassador of Norway to China. His Excellency Marin Nohak, Ambassador of Pakistan to China. His Excellency Luis Quesada, Ambassador of Peru to China. His Excellency Jose Alwensto Duarte, Ambassador of Portugal to China. Her Excellency Aleka Suhadonic, Ambassador of Slovenia to China. His Excellency Siya Banga Kawele, Ambassador of South Africa to China. His Excellency Bernardo Rijazzoni, Ambassador of Switzerland to China. His Excellency Arthur Sirisamut, Ambassador of Thailand to China. His Excellency Ali Obed Doheri, Ambassador of UAE to China. His Excellency Sid Chatterjee, UN Resident Coordinator to China. Ambassadors, thank you all very much. I'm proud to introduce Dr. Henry Huiyao Wang, founder and president of Center for China and Globalization, who will chair this distinguished roundtable. Thank you. Floor is yours, Dr. Wang.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Miao and Ambassador Lin and the distinguished ambassadors of all 20 countries, and also Ambassador Sid Chatterjee from UN. So also our friends, our colleagues and media friends, you know, really a great honor to welcome all of you to CCG, to the 8th China and Globalization Forum that we have this Ambassador Roundtable. You know, we have, as a tradition, every year we have an Ambassador Roundtable in a big hotel, but this year because of the COVID, so we'll do it at our own office as a think tank roundtable. So the topic today would be the global mobility in the post-pandemic times. Of course, the trends, the challenges, the response, the experience all your respective countries have. So the world of 2022 has seen the world we are getting the 3rd year of the pandemic, while COVID-19 had its unprecedented impact and continue to pose critical threats to the global economy. We're seeing high inflation, we're seeing geopolitical conflict, and we see globalization is really has big setbacks. So the global cross-border mobility is really, I think, on top of every country's mind, and how we can really move the goods, capital, people, and around that. So China used to have 150 million people outbound tourism. We hope that day will come soon. So government has adopted the mechanism and adjust and response to strategies to this current crisis. And so we are really honored and extremely privileged to have all the distinguished ambassadors to join us today. And so this will be a great discussion. We'll carefully study and summarize all your comments and also discussion, and we'll actually make a think tank report, you know, out of this. So really appreciate all your time on an early Monday morning come to CCG. So to start with, I would really like to have the Ambassador Lin as a very distinguished guest that we invited. He's the president of Chinese People's Association for the Friendship with Foreign Countries. As we all know, this is association has several 3,000 sister cities around the world. Very influential and also very well connected with outside world. So prior to this role, Ambassador Lin served as Ambassador of China to South Africa, and he also served as the Director General of the Department of African Affairs at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and also Director General of Department of Foreign Affairs Management at Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and also Ambassador of China to Malawi. So without further ado, I would like to give the floor to Ambassador Lin. Ambassador Lin, please, your opening remark.
谢谢这个主持人和王辉耀理事长，尊敬的王辉耀理事长，尊敬的各位大使阁下。Sorry, my English is not good enough, so I try to speak. 各位朋友，大家好。中国与全球化论坛已成为各方瞩目的国际高端论坛。本人很高兴出席第8届中国与全球化论坛大使圆桌。一是代表中国人民对外友好协会对本届论坛的成功举办表示热烈祝贺。二是愿意就全球化有关问题我很羡慕各位大使，我曾经也是中国的驻外大使，我也愿意就全球化有关问题分享本人的看法。当前经济全球化正遭遇前所未有的逆流，世界经济复苏面临多重挑战，不仅面临新冠肺炎疫情全球肆虐的天灾，且遭遇集团对抗、单方面制裁、脱钩断供等人祸的双重冲击，全球产业链、供应链、资金链安全遭受严重破坏。世界正经历严重的能源、粮食和金融危机。在这艰难的时刻，5大洲驻华使节代表齐聚一堂，共同探索后疫情时期全球化的趋势、挑战与对策。目的，我想就是向世界发出团结合作、共谋和发展的积极信息，具有重大意义。全球化是基于联合国规则、公平竞争、互利互惠的市场原则，推动各种生产要素在全球范围内高效优化配置，让发达国家的资本、高科技和人才等优势获得广阔市场和丰厚的利润，也让发展中国家通过引进资金、技术、管理经验，推动本国经济增长、民生改善和基础设施建设。反过来，又为发达国家提供了更多物美价廉的商品和服务，以及更大的市场空间，让各国成为你中有我，我中有你的利益和命运共同体，实现了合作共赢、共同发展。事实证明，全球化是世界经济发展的历史必然，是各国实现发展繁荣的必然选择，不是某些国家给予其他国家的施舍或恩惠，更不可能被人为的逆转或改变。经济全球化解决了发展动力问题。It's OK 我再讲一下后面这句话很重要的全球化对全球化的认识，希望翻译重新做一下。那再 stop 了。那 is OK。事实证明，全球化是世界经济发展的历史必然，这个已经有了，也是各国实现共同繁荣的必然选择，不是某些国家 给予其他国家的施舍或恩惠，更不可能被人为的逆转或改变。经济全球化解决了发展动力问题，但并不能自动解决发展成果分配问题。有的国家坚持资本至上，任由资本和高科技等利益集团垄断全球化带来的发展成果，国内绝大多数民众却未能从中获得实惠，造成富者一富，穷者一穷。最富有的1%人口拥有超过99%人口的财富，导致社会撕裂、政治极化、民粹主义、保护主义等逆全球化思潮的开头。有的国家固守冷战思维，你输我赢的冷战思维，将经济合作政治化、武器化、阵营化，人为破坏了全球化的产业链、供应链、资金链安全，严重影响各国人民生产、生活和生存。只要不带偏见的人都能明白，上述这些问题的根源，并不是经济全球化本身，而是有的国家分配制度和治理出现失灵。40多年来，中国对内坚持改革开放，坚持以人民为中心，坚持走共同富裕的发展道路；对外积极把握经济全球化的时代潮流，秉持人类命共同体的理念，坚持共商共建共享原则，积极推动“一带一路”建设，致力于同世界各国合作共赢，共同发展。中国坚持和发展了中国特色社会主义，充分发挥市场在资源配置中的决定性作用，更好发挥政府作用，让发展成果由全体人民共享。全国居民人均可支配收入过去40年增长了200多倍，如期让14亿多人民一个都不少的摆脱了绝对贫困，过上了全面小康生活。美国哈佛大学连续10年在中国开展的民调结果显示，中国人民对政府的满意度连续保持在90%以上。中国的成功实践表明，全球化是经济发展、人民幸福的必由之路。关键是发展成果要真正让全体人民共享。中国是经济全球化的参与者、受益者、贡献者和建设者，以探索出中国特色的全球化，那就是对内致力全体人民共同富裕的现代化，对外致力于合作共赢、共同发展的全球化，为21世纪全球化提供了中国方案，贡献了中国智慧。各位阁下朋友们，尽管经济全球化遭遇逆流，但历史潮流势不可挡。和平与发展仍是当今时代主题，要和平谋合作促发展，仍是各国人民的共同期待。各国虽然社会制度、发展道路、价值理念不同，但只要我们相互尊重、求同存异、平等互利，就能和平相共处，合作共赢，共同发展。中国愿与各国携手推进全球化，朝着更加开放、包容、普惠及平衡共赢的方向发展，共同建设一个更加美好的世界，让世界人民都过上更加美好的生活。谢谢。
Thank you, Ambassador Lin, for your opening remark. I think you have outlined the importance of globalization that we need to continue, and also how China is making all its efforts to support globalization and also work with all the other countries, and also to lift the poverty of millions of people in China, but also really contributing to the world. So I think your speech was give a very good outline and what's current China position, but also China's views on the globalized world. Thank you very much again, Ambassador. Now we are also the official roundtable, the Ambassador Roundtable will continue now, and we know that the globalization have got setbacks, but we also have a bit of good news too. I mean, MC 12 minister meeting, WTO has just concluded last week. We know there's some agreement on the fishery agreement. There's also some understanding on the patent for the pandemic IPR issues, and also food. Restrictions should be lifted to some degree. So there's some positive news. But I think how can we accelerate this pace after COVID-19, this cooperation, and how will the global cooperation go forward? I think that's really the wisdom we need to seek from our ambassadors. Navigating overlapping bilateral, regional, polylateral, and multilateral format. How can government work together, one with the other, to reintegrate the global system, economy, and achieve better global governance? So today we will start our roundtable a little bit differently than last time. Last time we had 20 ambassadors here. When we released ambassador book edited by CCG, we with alphabetic order from A, but we have ambassadors suggest, like our friend from Switzerland said, maybe we should do it reverse. Now we start with you, and then we will have Ambassador Chatterjee to start this. I'll give a brief introduction of Ambassador Sid Chatterjee. He's the UN resident coordinator in China since 2021, and he was appointed by UN resident China, of course, just last year, and has more than 25 years experience in international cooperation, sustainable development, humanitarian coordination, and peace and security. He served as a UN resident coordinator in Kenya, resident representative of UNDP, and representative of United Nations Population Fund in Kenya, and also regional director of Middle East and Europe for the United Nations Office Project Service in Denmark. So Ambassador Chatterjee, we'll probably around 5 minutes each ambassador, and then so that we should finish this by 12:30. So let Your Excellency Sid Chatterjee, your turn, please.
Thank you very much. Your Excellency Ambassador Lin, Henry Wang, the President of the China Center for Globalization, ambassadors present, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. The COVID-19 pandemic struck us like a bolt of lightning, and in that flash of the lightning, we saw the contours of inequality really emerge. And in what we are presented is what I call the triple C crisis: a crisis of the COVID, which is a health crisis, a crisis of climate, which is an existentialist threat, and a crisis of poverty and conflicts, which are engaging each other. So what we are seeing is rising inequalities within countries, and we are seeing rising inequalities between countries. So what is it that we could be doing to rebuild, recover, and research? That is what I have come here to learn today, and from such a distinguished group of ambassadors present here. What is clear, Excellency, is we need global solidarity. Even at the height of the Cold War, smallpox was eradicated. Today, more than ever, we need countries, scientists, doctors to come together, and perhaps the magic vaccine lies somewhere in between, and make sure that we come out of this pandemic robustly and perhaps prevent a future pandemic to happen. And therefore, the intricate necessity of rebuilding and recalibrating multilateralism therefore becomes very much at the centerpiece of this. Excellency, we need action on the sustainable development goals. We're slipping back. People are going back into poverty. In fact, as per the latest report of the UN Global Crisis Response Group, 60% of workers have lower real incomes than before the pandemic. for the first time in decades, the number of people living below the international poverty line has increased exponentially. And this is unacceptable. So therefore, when we are talking about action on the SDGs, any effort by any member state to advance the sustainable development goals is most welcome. Globally or locally. But these are initiatives that can only happen when the congruence of member states, when the congruence of public-private partnerships, when the congruence of putting women and youth at the very center of our development agenda starts to happen. The third, and most important, is to leave no one behind. That is the very principle on which the Sustainable Development Goals is premised. That is the very principle around which all member states across the world agree that the Sustainable Development Goals must stand robustly as a North Star for our shared future as we advance to the 2030. And that will not happen if we have half of humanity, women, children, people living in least developed countries, people living in small island states are there. So it is a collective responsibility, and therefore the Sustainable Development Goals remains the North Star around which we must all unite completely. Now, the 2030 agenda itself is premised on three pillars. Pillar number one is peace and love. Pillar number two is development. Pillar number three is human rights. They are not separable from each other. They are a collective whole, and we must move with them as a whole. So when we talk about the 2030 agenda, it is a cohesive and an integrated agenda encompassing the three pillars that I mentioned. And the power of the 2030 agenda comes with the recognition that the dignity of the human person is fundamental for all nations and for all people and for all segments of society. That will remain our constant endeavor as the UN family. And that is what I, as the UN resident coordinator in China, will work with China, not only in advancing our cooperation framework within China to achieve China's ambitious targets that have been led both in the 14th five-year plan and the 2030 agenda, but work with China, share its important lessons with the rest of the world.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Ambassador Chatterjee. And I think you outlined the SDG 2030 agenda as a key theme of your speech, and which is very important. I think China was actually to fulfill the number one of that objective, leave the poverty 10 years ahead of schedule. So this is great. I think SDG 17 objective also can be a good measurement of human rights as well. So I think you mentioned that, and that can be also which are agreed by 193 countries, that we need to take an overall view on those issues, which also will give us some new thought. Now, I'd like to invite our next ambassador, starting also with the U, and His Excellency Ali Obed Adhari, Ambassador of United Arab Emirates to China. He started his ambassadorship in 2017. Dr. Harry has joined the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation in the UAE in 2017, where he was appointed ambassador to China. But prior to that, he was deputy chairman of the board of member of the Emirates General Petroleum Corporation, Emirat, and also CEO of ROAS Fertilizer Industries and CEO of both Abu Dhabi National Tanker Company and National Gas Shipping Company. So, Ambassador Adhari, your turn, please.
Thank you very much, President Wang, and thank you for your invitation to this impressive 8th China Globalization Forum. I particularly congratulate you for your foresight with your choice of global mobility for the topic of this timely Ambassadors Roundtable. This pandemic has now lasted almost 2.5 years. dispensing a grip with the death toll of millions of lighting, countless more. All of our economies have been disrupted, and our international supply chain dislocated. Yet all our countries are resilient, and certainly I would say the UAE is. And life is gradually returning to some form of normalcy. Over the past years, countries have tried various approaches, policies, and programs in their efforts for resolutions of the pandemic. My fellow ambassadors, we have much to gain today by this opportunity to exchange our experiences, challenges, and aspirations for the future. Cross-border communication, travel, economics, and global trade are particularly areas of concern. Although economies are recovering, the world is still coping with the new outbreaks and the new variants, and the pandemic seems far from over. Increased cooperation between countries will be a key method of effectively tackle the challenges brought on by the pandemic. We must work together to ensure equitable access to vaccines in order to close the stark COVID-19 vaccination gap around the world. In my view, it is inarguable that a fair and equitable distribution of vaccines is both a strategic investment and moral obligation. Throughout COVID, the UAE has been a hub for supplies and diplomacy in the Middle East and North Africa region and beyond. This year, the UAE serves as the elected member of the UN Security Council 2022-2023 term. During its presidency for the month of March, the UAE called on UN Security Council to facilitate the closure of the global COVID-19 vaccination gap, because we believe this year represents the best opportunity to date to improve vaccination in countries. The challenge of the lingering the pandemic is exacerbated by regional conflicts, which are contributing to the destabilization of our global community. Food security and energy security are now of a serious concern, especially in the vulnerable, less developed regions. This will undoubtedly have a cascading effect of spreading international instability. Even for rich, developed economies, there are heightened anxiety of inflation, income affordability, and possible recessions. A recent report released by IMF indicated that the global growth is projected to slow from estimated 6.1% in 2021 to 3.6% in 2022 and 2023. Global supply chains have yet to fully recover following the recent lockdown of Shanghai. Shortages of manufactured goods could intensify and add to anxiety global inflationary pressures. For China accounts for 15% of the world merchandise exports. What is the solution? Undoubtedly, countries around the world should remain committed to a shared vision of a common, cooperative, and sustainable security. The UAE is committed to promoting regional stability and safeguarding the world peace. As an elected member of the UN Security Council, the UAE expects to firmly work with China and all council members to strengthen multilateralism. As the global and increasingly multipolar communities seek innovative solutions to these rapidly arising challenges, clarity of vision and unity of purpose will be crucial for making progress. The UAE strives to work together with China and other like-minded countries, finding solutions to these urgent cross-border challenges and re-energizing the global mobility in timely manner. I am confident that this year's forum will be as productive as it will be inspiring, and I look forward to contributing to the lively discussion with you and my colleague ambassadors. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ambassador from UAE, and you're forming an energy important country, and you mentioned about energy crisis, the supply chain, and all we have to do to combat that with all the concerted efforts. Next, I would like to invite Your Excellency Ambassador from Thailand, Ambassador Srishamut. And Ambassador Srishamut was appointed Ambassador to China in 2019. And prior to this, he was the Deputy Permanent Secretary of Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Thailand, and also Director General of Department of International Economic Affairs and APEC SOM leaders of Thailand. He was ambassador to Austria, Slovak Republic, and Slovenia, and permanent representative of the United Nations and the international agencies in Vienna. Ambassador Srishma, your turn, please.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Wang. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, first of all, I would like to thank Ambassador Lin Songtian for your speech. I think for me, looking at the heading, the topic of today's discussion, global mobility, I would like to address the trends and challenges that we see coming up, and also talk a little bit about this year. First of all, the things I see for this year is that there has been a tendency for more international and regional cooperation, and this is something that the Center for Globalization has been doing, and also the Association for Friendship with Foreign Countries have been trying to promote, is to contribute towards more cooperation among the peoples, among the governments, among the provincial and people in the rural and provincial areas. So this is something that I think will help us to become stronger after the post COVID-19 pandemic. So what we're seeing now is the trend towards more cooperation. Dr. Wang talked about the WTO, the need for more food security, energy security, more cooperation in supply chains. So this is the trend that I think we were seeing in the future. Secondly, the trend towards digitalization, because we see that from the pandemic, it's better to work from a distance, ordering food or working from home. The use of more robotics and automation in the workplace. This is something that will become the new norm because people don't need to interact with each other on a confined space. People can work independently. So this is the trend that we're seeing. The trend towards more sustainability. People talk about environmental concerns. So Thailand is the chair of the APEC this year. And our focus is on bio, circular, and green economy. And Ambassador Siddharth was talking about the UN Sustainable Development Goals 2030. So this is the trend that I think the international community is trying to focus on. China has been a leader of green technology, green innovation. You have clean energy. You have high standards in utilizing clean energy in automobiles, in factories, in the workplace. And I think China can contribute towards the drive towards more sustainable and green and clean energy. And also in terms of tourism, this is something that we're seeing that it's going to be more difficult to travel abroad in the future. And we see the trend towards more sustainable tourism, ecotourism, quality rather than quantity tourism. Lastly, in terms of this year, in Asia, it's an important year. China is the chair of the BRICS country. Indonesia will host the G20 leaders meeting. Thailand will host the APEC, Asia Pacific Economic Cooperation. And what we're trying to do now is to try to push forward these trends that I mentioned, the trend towards more use of digitalization, the trend towards more use of clean and green energy, sustainable energy. I think we're talking about the use of the APEC travel card. It's kind of like a visa, where you try to promote mobility in the business profession, allow for business people in the Asia Pacific region to travel to other countries to conduct a business without having to apply for visas. We're talking about discussions towards free trade area in the Asia Pacific, which will be the largest free trade area in the world. Right now we have the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, which is already the largest, but FTAP in the Asia Pacific will be even larger. We're talking about the interoperability of vaccination certification, where you can use certificates in China and you can use it in other countries to have the same effect. So these are some of the trends that we see in the world. So I very much welcome the discussion here to learn from all the distinguished ambassadors on their experience, and also to help to push forward the trends and developments in this area for future cooperation. Thank you very much.
Yes. Thank you, Ambassador Shrishman. You're excellent. I think you mentioned about that's exactly the purpose of having this roundtable, to each country share their unique experience so we can learn from each other and benefit from each other. You talk about energy, food, and digitalization, sustainability. I'm glad that Thailand is the host of APEC Summit this year, and we have a 3 summit, BRICS, G20, and APEC, all held in Asia this year. It's very good, and we talk about future big FTA like FTAP. So we hope that Asian economy will continue to boom and take the support for the world economy. Thank you very much. Now I'd like to invite our next distinguished ambassador, Bernardino Ragazzini, ambassador of Switzerland to China. And also to Mongolia and to Democratic People's Republic of Korea. You're ambassador of 3 countries. but ambassador, you studied the China ambassador in 2019. Ambassador Ragazzini was appointed ambassador to China in 2019. Of course, prior to this, he was ambassador to France, ambassador to Italy, ambassador to Switzerland, to the Association of ASEAN, and ambassador to Indonesia. So you're very familiar with the region, but I know congratulations on Switzerland being now the UN Security Member Country Council. So thank you for that. So it's your turn, please, Ambassador Ragazzini, please.
Mr. President and founder of the CCG, dear Henry, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much, Mr. President, for the invitation to this year's forum. Once again, a very welcome opportunity offered by CCG for an open exchange of views. Quite a unique institution. I much appreciated in all my years here in Beijing. Today's topic, global mobility, is of utmost importance. At the same time, it gives me the feeling of a déjà vu. It reflects indeed a topic we addressed last year already, global trade and mobility in post-pandemic times. It is, of course, not by lack of fantasy. It means that the times change and the problem remains. Mobility. The world is moving again. Swiss International Airlines had not enough capacities to match the demand from the market, which is booming, especially on transatlantic routes. Bookings are booming this summer in all tourist destinations. The same airline was obliged to suspend flights to China. Circuit breaker rules have killed the market. Those rules allow just 5% of the pre-COVID capacities. In fact, only 1 out of 4 monthly allowed flights had actually taken place. China is drifting apart from the rest of the world. The reasons are well known. It is not my role nor my intention to criticize your choices, namely the zero-case policy. It has been characterized by the words of the Director General of the World Health Organization as unsustainable. While not criticizing, it is undisputable that this choice has consequences. As an ambassador, I am particularly keen about the situation of my Swiss fellow nationals. 3 years of isolation from the outside world, impossibility to travel to China, increasing difficulties for international schools have left marks. A downward tendency in numbers accelerates, with several families deciding to leave China for good. The second center of interest to me are Swiss companies. The lockdowns and on-off economy induces large losses in profits. Besides immediate consequences, questions arise about the future. The attractiveness and the size of the market remain. But to decide new investments becomes challenging. No chairman of the board ever will decide a major investment based on a Zoom meeting. One needs to travel, to meet people, to see firsthand the places, to build up confidence with local authorities. And no member of a global board will take the burden of the 3 weeks quarantine. On the short term, a few decisions are already pending. Those who have established regional hubs in China, in mainland China, will have to resettle the hubs to other places in the region because it is not possible to travel to cover them from mainland China. Another layer of the question are high-level political contacts. Without willing to be naive and play down international tensions, I bet that half of the misunderstanding could be dampened by the resumption of in-person diplomacy out of artificial settings and bubbles. Ladies and gentlemen, how often in these very premises dedicated to globalization, we have lauded the benefits of openness. Open markets, our bilateral free trade agreement has boosted our exchanges. Openness towards the markets themselves, whereas the state itself just creates favorable framework condition, exerting utmost restraint in being itself an economic actor. Globalization, at the end of the day, is an economic rationality prevailing over and orienting political decision. We notice that politics is massively back in economy in China and security prevailing over economy. The war in Ukraine and international tensions are reshaping value chains, especially for energy sources and high-end technology. We practice openness in research. My embassy has issued in 2021 more visas to Chinese students than in 2019, before COVID. The number of Swiss students in China at the moment is practically zero. And finally, open borders, today's topic. Travel restrictions have become a blow to globalization. There is no globalization without confidence, and no confidence without meeting in person, knowing each other, free movement of people. COVID might have rationalized a wild growth in business travel. After 3 years of Zoom meetings, we are aware of the urgency to move back to meeting in person. One cannot pursue globalization and total control at the same time. It is either or. I hope our Chinese partners understand that self-isolation will end up harming China in the first place and the rest of the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador Ragazzini, and for your candid comments. And of course, we know COVID is hard for every country, and China certainly take its own approach. But I think we are hearing some good news, like the daily occurrence of the case is really diminishing these days, and Beijing has actually cut down its quarantine time from 1 week in hotel, 1 week at home. So from 3 weeks to 2 weeks now. And I know the Premier League actually has taught a state council meeting
that we should increase international flight. And he actually went to the Ministry of Transportation to really reinforce that. So I hope that situation will change soon. But your comments are well taken. I think it's useful to hear that. Now I'd like to introduce our next speaker, His Excellency Ambassador Siabonga Kiwili, Ambassador of South Africa to China. Ambassador Kiwili was appointed as Ambassador to China in 2021. And prior to this role, you served as a member of the UN Broadband Commission for Sustainable Development. And also you were the Minister of Home Affairs of South Africa, Minister of Telecommunications and Postal Services, and Minister of State Security. So I have many important portfolios. I'm glad to have your turn, please.
Thank you very much, President Wang, my friend Vicente, Excellencies. South Africa is slowly recovering from the devastating impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, as reflected in our recent growth and job statistics. At the same time, we are also recovering from a severe impact of climate change. As you might have heard, we are experiencing droughts on the eastern side and fires on the western side. In April, we had very severe floods in Devon and the eastern side. Ladies and gentlemen, in dealing with this public health crisis, the global community has learned the hard way that the pandemic does not respect borders or national protectionism, but requires our coordinated response and solidarity. Science and access to affordable vaccines are decisive factors in winning the war against the virus. Our Trade Minister Patel welcomed the recent compromise deal reached at WTO as a practical outcome that will help developing countries to react quickly to new variants. South Africa believes these new or emerging global threats require strong leadership, coordinated responses, and solidarity. Will not be safe until prosperous, until everyone is safe and have access to basic needs. Excellencies, South Africa is looking to a stronger practice of multilateralism, effective and inclusive global governance to support the vulnerable. The UN must play a leading role. We are also participating in other important forums such as G20 and BRICS. China, as the current chair of the BRICS partnership, will be hosting the summit later this week. BRICS has been playing a leading role in dealing with global challenges and coordinating efforts to support multilateralism, promoting fairer international trade, global growth, and developmental agenda. BRICS has been in the forefront of regional and global efforts to contain the impact of the pandemic. At the greatest time, some of its institutions, like the New Development Bank, has pledged most needed resources to deal with the pandemic. It is also allocating significant resources to mitigate climate change and funding new infrastructure. As I conclude, Mr. Chairman, my expectation of these global efforts is that we should promote multilateral cooperation and rules, strengthen macroeconomic coordination, mitigate climate change, and work together to foster an open, low carbon, and innovative world economy. We should reopen borders to improve mobility and tourism. This is very important, particularly for developing countries, because tourism plays a critical role for employment and growth in the developing countries. We should maintain a steady and unimpeded industrial and supply chains to enhance economic recovery. All these efforts must be done with a view to achieve stronger and sustainable global development. I wish this forum great success. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Kiwili. Yeah, excellent comments. I think absolutely multilateralism we have to stick to, and the UN, and of course now we have a BRICS summit coming up. South Africa is a pretty important role, and open borders absolutely important. I think there will be more emphasis probably on that. So thank you again. And now I would like to invite Her Excellency and then Alenka Shehadolink, Ambassador of Slovenia to China. Ambassador Shehadolink was appointed Ambassador to China in 2019. She served as a member of International Trade Promotion Commission at the Slovenia Export and Development Bank, Ambassador of Slovenia to Israel, Consul General of Slovenia in New York. So Ambassador, your turn, please.
Thank you. First, I would like to thank the CCG for offering a platform for an open exchange, as well as I would like to thank to the President of Friendship Association, Lin Songtian, for the opening remarks. Allow me to put the topic of today's roundtable, global mobility in post-pandemic times, in the a bit wider context. COVID-19 pandemic happened at a time of tremendous global changes, transformations in technology that were ongoing since around 2005 onwards. The tech transformation is changing how really how our system, social, political, and economic, operate globally. The second, geopolitical transformation. Increased competition between states, heightened geopolitical tensions, and erosion of multilateral cooperation. Environmental transformation, the loss of biodiversity, resources depletion, including the rise of zoonotic diseases, as COVID-19 is, climate change. And now allow me to make brief remarks on the trends and challenges. The pandemic has prompted the unprecedented display of state economic power, as well as authoritarian emergency measures. Pandemic is accelerating digital transformation, as our colleague, Ambassador of Thailand, have already mentioned. The switch to remote working being the most significant, as well as push for greater automation. Digitalization, as it seems, is seen as risk mitigation. One should be also aware that technological advances like tools for contact tracing, population surveillance, or quarantine tracing that the countries were employing in bigger or lesser measures have also enormous implications for privacy. It might also be that we will start to use the term globalization before and after COVID-19. We are witnessing the trend of regionalization of global supply chains. If before COVID-19, one could count on-time delivery of resources, parts, and goods, that is no longer the case. In combination with heightened geopolitical tensions that might become a lasting outcome of the pandemic 19. Similar as digitalization is seen as a risk mitigation, the regionalization of supply chains might be seen and is seen as risk mitigation. Erosion of multilateral cooperation that we are witnessing for a long time just adds to the problem. At the same time, it is precisely the multilateral framework that we badly need to address the questions that the global community is facing today. Now allow me to give just few data that speak vividly about the tremendous change that have happened in the last 2.5 years. In particular, in relation between Europe and China, or European countries and China. The number of Europeans in China today is decimated. At present, is less than 60,000. The number of European researchers in China has dwindled to around 400. student exchanges have stopped. I need to correct myself. The Chinese students are still studying in Slovenia, but we somehow did not succeed to get any student back. Those numbers cannot sustain the important trade and other relations with Europe and China. The in-person exchanges, and a Swiss colleague has already mentioned that, between Chinese and European sides, including member states, high representatives are, with exceptions, non-existent. Our own work as heads of mission is becoming increasingly difficult. Something as a yearly rotation is now a yearly project because of the lack of transportations and similar. Exchanges with our, we cannot exchange with our partners across China, which should be a normal part of our work. And travel restrictions are increasingly difficult to justify and to sustain. And that it is to the detriment to our relations. In conclusion, the background paper for today's roundtable describes globalization as essentially being about cross-border mobility of goods, people and capital. Allow me to add then, when speaking about mobility, we speak as well about the relational dynamics between people, objects, being it goods, being it capital, as well as ideas. For that, we need open platforms like the one today. With that, I thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Sohadilink, and for your great remark. I think you're right. You know, we are facing the risk. We are decoupling the people exchanges. That's really dangerous. I'm surprised to hear that. You know, Europeans in China is you know, almost around 60,000, reduced, and also research is only 400. So that's a surprise. But I hope that the situation will change soon. I hope that we are all have collective wisdom, and we will try to combat these challenges. Appreciate your remarks. Now, like I know also you've been the chair of the European Council, last year rotating chair of the European Union ambassadors here in Beijing. So you have a lot of European figures, which is great to know. Now I'd like to have our next ambassador speaker, His Excellency José Augusto Durete, Ambassador of Portugal to China. Ambassador Augusto was appointed as ambassador to China in 2017, quite a few years already. And prior to this, he was ambassador to Portugal, to Mozambique, and a non-resident ambassador to Seychelles, Switzerland, Mauritius, and Tanzania. He was also a chief advisor to the president of the Portuguese Republic. Ambassador Director, your turn, please.
Thank you very much, Henry. Thank you very much for organizing the event. And thank you very much for inviting me again. I mean, it's very, very important for me to listen and to participate in this. And I thank you very much also to Ambassador Lin, his remarks and his presence in here. Well, for me, it's a pleasure to be back at the Center of China and Globalization and to participate in this. If we had to describe in one word how to best respond to trends, challenges, and responses we were asked to reflect upon with this roundtable, I would simply mention common rules, to develop common rules and to maintain common rules. Common rules that are clear and provide a level playing field for everybody. On the public health debate, we obviously don't dispute the sovereignty choices of how to best deal and respond to the pandemic. But after almost 3 years, we need to know what we expect. We need stability and predictability. Our businesses community requires as much for their investment decisions. Our political leaders ask us, what direction is China taking? And our citizens, be they students, artists, or simply tourists, are keenly in need of orientations and expectations. As the world is beginning to resume normal operations, China is still in pursuing a zero COVID policy. As I said, we respect the way China decides to deal with the pandemic, but we must ask ourselves whether the pandemic and the current situation, which goes well behind public health policies, as it impacts so many other areas and stems from geopolitical and strategic decisions, is conducive to more or less globalization, to more or less international trade, to more or less dialogue and cooperation. We believe in free trade and fair trade. We stand for the benefits of political dialogue, even when we don't see eye to eye. And we defend the rules-based international order, which has brought so many benefits to all of us around the table, including China. However, we also see the writings on the wall, and these do not appear to favor globalization in the right moment, or at least the kind of globalization we have had for the last decades. If that is indeed the case, where do we go from here? Hopefully on a path that focuses on three main areas. First of all, upholding the virtues and the necessity for open and a frank dialogue between all of us, refuting the idea of the West and the rest, and standing up for the rules, common rules, that underpin the international system. We are, after all, together in so many fronts that the idea that we can fight all our common challenges successfully without cooperating or by creating artificial divisions makes simply no sense. Secondly, we must defend multilateralism in its entirety, not just the common rules that we like best, but the whole system of norms that make globalization possible and the principles that are universal and accepted by all. And finally, we need to resolutely fight back against the erosion of norms, which, if left unchecked, would unravel the international system, as the Russian invasion of Ukraine clearly demonstrates. In short, the common rules we stand for are the ones that allow us to avoid hollow debates on North versus South, or East against West. We don't believe in neither. Cooperation is needed in many fronts and does not prevent frank and open dialogue on issues when we disagree. On the contrary, actually, the more we disagree, the more we need to talk and to make bridges. The more we know and understand each other, the less likely we are to become prisoners of preconceived ideas and prejudices. That said, we must also be clear on the values we defend, the principles we uphold, and the norms we cherish. Doing so does not mean we expect others to do the same as we do. But we must recognize that many of those values and of those principles and of those norms stem from international law, treaties, and agreements that we are all part and co-signatory. Being clear on all of these allows us of all to know where we stand and what kind of international order we want to see in the near future. So on this, we also need stability and predictability. I don't think anyone here will disagree with this, since this is just common sense. But on this forum, we are just preaching to the choir. We need to understand that others make decisions based on different factors and consideration. And those, if relying on analysis of the current state of affairs, point to deglobalization and to the revision of the long-held norms and values. So we must fight for what we know is best and has proven track record. And that is to go back to where I started, the rules-based international order that brings predictability and reconciliation, not separation, segregation, and conflict. To conclude, I would like, and I'll argue, that in one word, the current trend and probability that the post-pandemic times appears to be one of revising or of even backtracking on globalization. And so the immediate challenge is to fight that and to defend the international order, its common rules, the level playing field, and the might and right of international law. All these so that our response can face today's challenges and avoid creating dividing lines where sides must be chosen and dialogue can only happen within confined lines. After all, we want one globalized world, not a series of a different and competing globalized little regions, when not divergent worlds. That is what post-pandemic times must not look like in the future. Thank you very much for your attention.
Okay. Thank you, Ambassador Dorete, and for your comprehensive remarks. I think you're right. You know, international multilateral system, international law, and UN system that we have to stick. And it's not a binary word and black or white. I mean, we have to really follow the international multilateral system. So I think very good comments there. And of course, we need to really safeguard the international order. We have to improve it, enhance it, and now the compilation of this system. Thank you again. And next speaker, I'd like to invite His Excellency Luis Quezada, Ambassador of Peru to China. You just started your China post in 2018. And prior to that, you were the Director General for Economic Affairs, NEMA, APAC 2060, SOM Chair at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and also served as Ambassador of Peru to Australia and also New Zealand. So your turn, please, Ambassador.
Thank you very much. First of all, Dr. Wang and Dr. Miao, I am very grateful for the invitation to participate in this China and the Globalization Forum. So, Ambassador Lin, colleagues, I'll go straight to the point. The COVID-19 pandemic has been the biggest trial for a generation, and we should acknowledge the resulting scenario was not only the greatest breakdown to globalization and global mobility in the century, but also represented an urgent issue to be faced among other important challenges to the current world order. The concurrence of many issues, such as the disruption of international trade, disarray of supply chains, increase of energy costs, travel restrictions within and from other countries, inflation and economic recession, the effects of climate change and worldwide food scarcity cannot be overlooked. The changes in our societies, the increase of extremism, political discontent, and polarization in many parts of the world are other important factors of turmoil. Many countries judged that the best strategy to tackle these problems are promoting inclusive policies, reconstruction of resilient supply chains, and easing travel restrictions to strengthen trade, investment, and tourism. The leaders nowadays are considering some important questions. Are we approaching the end of globalization as we know it? Is global economic integration going to change the institutions that support it? Can we recover quickly from the economic effects of COVID-19? What approaches will China take in the future? As with globalization, global mobility is a process with multiple impacts on the lives of our societies. Although the world is living a transitional phase accelerated by the pandemic, we are also witnessing that globalization and economic integration, despite the described difficulties, keep going on. The interaction of goods, services, capital, and people to move seamlessly from one country to another continues to provide economic growth and development. We also see that our supply chains are adapting to the new environment. To recover worldwide and strengthen global economic integration, trade and investment must flow without barriers. People should travel freely again, and our health systems and networks of cooperation must be strengthened to cope with current and new issues. China tackled the pandemic with its own anti-COVID-19 policy approach through intensive use of technology and direct control measures. China will have to show that apart from its engagement with the circular economy, it has to do even more to be more engaged with the world economy as a whole, and that it's ready to play its part in the strengthening of global supply chains. We need to take into account market access priorities in a constructive way and foster economic integration as before. Looking back, Latin America's approach to the pandemic could be summed up as one of a fruitful but challenging task. Our countries suffered deeply. Latin America was the region that lost the most in terms of lives and economic growth. We too adapted ourselves to protect our citizens' health and incomes with fast and innovative measures. Almost all of our countries conducted a very successful vaccination campaigns. Now we are fostering the recovery of our economies by strengthening our supply chains and attracting new and better investments, especially in digital transformation and tourism. Peru is eager to continue our efforts to attract more capital and business needed for our post-pandemic recovery, especially since an important segment of our society went back to poverty. Different regions have pursued different approaches, reflecting their mix of risk tolerance, needs, resources, capacity, and past pandemic experiences. While some regions are swiftly working in the standardization of public health procedures, others have struggled to maintain agreed regulations and procedures. Without a doubt, the next decade will be quite challenging in terms of the inventiveness and dynamism of the private sector, the creation of employment, and the reduction of poverty through flexible and innovative policies from governments plus the intensive use of technology. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador Kiseta. And you mentioned all those important things. I think that very important. And Latin America, of course, is also a rising economy, and also, except Mexico, all the other American countries are largest trading partners with China. So and Peru is a member of the CPTPP. So we hope that we enlarge the cooperation and also safeguard multilateral system. Now I'd like to invite His Excellency Moin Yuhak, Ambassador of Pakistan to China. You started your ambassadorship here 2020, and before that you served as ambassador of Pakistan to Paris and permanent delegate to UNESCO. And also you assumed the position of Director General of Europe at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Pakistan. So your turn, please.
Thank you so much, President Wang, Ambassador Ling Songtian, President CPFC, Excellencies, dear colleagues, and dear participants, greeting to all of you. Indeed, a privilege for me to be here for the first time to attend the Ambassadors Roundtable at this very premier think tank of China, and to discuss and talk on a topic which is of great significance to societies and individuals across the globe. Certainly, as mentioned by earlier speakers, that we are facing a formidable crisis. Like Mr. Chatterjee said, that it was like a bolt of lightning for all of us. It certainly ensnared the entire world, leaving behind a trail of battered economies, depleted resources, jittery world markets, and a tragic tale of misery, individuals suffering in misery. And it is a test for the entire human race of what we have achieved so far. And indeed, a test of our governance systems also. In Pakistan too, we were tested. Being a developing country, we have to face many challenges. There was shortage of essential medical supplies. we came to know the deficiencies of our public health system. But we followed the international best practices to set up necessary infrastructure to combat this health crisis. It was smart lockdowns, special economic packages for the vulnerable parts of the societies, and vaccines. And we thank all the international countries, especially China, for very timely support to us, especially vaccines, which have helped in saving lives in our country. So, colleagues, we are in the third year of our struggle against pandemic, and I think we have reached a point where we can draw some lessons from this, either of adequacy or inadequacy of our global and national responses. And these are important lessons because we have to draw short-term and long-term solutions. So I would like to say a few points. Firstly, in our view, of course, it has been said earlier also that any approach to dealing with the health crisis has to be inclusive and not divisive. Secondly, that it's a health crisis that we are talking about, which has, of course, impacted the entire humanity. So it has to be based on scientific evidence and methods of epidemiology and community medicines. Thirdly, you have seen the impact on trade, tourism, travel, education, and the use of technology has come to the fore, the importance of technology for overcoming these different challenges. For example, I think we need to more talk about cross-border trade, creating cross-border platforms for payments, smart logistics. In Pakistan, of course, we are a developing country, but we have a very strong IT manpower, young, there are startups who are coming up with new solutions from this crisis. I think we need to work together to help these startups to think about new technologies. Fourthly, we may be able to eliminate pandemic in the near future, but its impact is going to linger on. And already, as mentioned by Mr. Chatterjee, that there are rising inequalities within nations and amongst nations. The poverty incidence, as you mentioned, with statistics is alarming. So I think it's very, very important that the SDGs, achieving those SDGs 2030 agenda of UN is extremely important. I know that the forthcoming BRICS Summit Plus Summit, on the title or the theme of this BRICS Plus Summit would be the achieving SDGs. So for that, I think this UN family, like WTO, Trade Organization, Tourism Organization, IFAD, FAO, ILO, UNICEF, they have to work together in unison to forge common positions, especially in helping the developing countries, which are most affected by this. Fifthly, we need to focus on SMEs. SMEs are the mostly hit community in our countries. I was reading a report this morning in Global Times or Daily News that in China, SMEs contribute 70% to the tax revenue. They form 50% of GDP of China. So they are so important, not only for countries like China, but us also. So the governments needs to see how they can help SMEs to recover from this crisis. Lastly, I would like to emphasize, which have been, of course, mentioned earlier also, that the success against COVID-19 rests in international solidarity. We should not be acting as competing political entities, but as a member of humanity struggling for a common cause. Here we are talking about international mobility. So I think the international community has to see how it can work together, it can walk together. There is a African proverb that if you have to go far, if you have to go fast, you go alone, but if you have to go far, you walk together. So these words, Mr. President, about strong support for multilateralism, collective effort, as mentioned by Ambassador of South Africa also, and I'm sure that will be mentioned by other speakers also. These are not mere cliches. These is the essence of today's discussion and would form, I think, would guide us in our future responses also. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Hawk, and you have raised a lot of good points. Of course, lessons we can learn. Inclusive. We really have to have the SME to involve, but also solidarity of the international community. We have to really work together. That's why important we are seeking all the brilliant minds here around table. So we hope to have some collective consensus we can reach at this round table. Now, next, I would like to invite Her Excellency Sine Sid, Ambassador of Norway to China and Mongolia, and Ambassador Sid started her China post in 2019, and prior to that, she served as Ambassador of Norway to Japan, Director of the section for Middle East and North Africa, and Special Envoy for Syria and Iraq at MFA Oslo, and of course, he also International Secretary in Norwegian Labour Party. So, Madame, your turn, please.
Thank you very much, and it's a great honor to be here this year again for another roundtable of ambassadors, and I'm very happy to be invited back. As others have stated, the COVID-19 pandemic has left a devastating global footprint, and regrettably, we now also see that the economic recovery is seriously impeded by Russia's war against Ukraine. The Portuguese ambassador just stated the importance of a rules-based international order. The ripple effect of the conflict on food prices also comes as global food prices stand at an all-time high, challenging food security in many countries. I'd like to make 3 points. First, a more disconnected world is in no one's interest. This pandemic has undermined the benefits of open international borders, the flow of goods, people, and ideas. Today, we are seeing a world more moving in different speeds in terms of opening up and lifting restrictions. The world and people are slowly being reconnected, but big parts of the world remain almost out of reach. This is unfortunate. As my Swiss colleague also mentioned, the impact on business relations between our companies and China, I can just also add to that. I often talk to board members located in Norway, but who have companies here, and they tell me concretely that they feel that the distance between their boardrooms in Norway and their local companies here in China is increasing. And this is, of course, something that we would like to see improve. And as ambassador to China, with the best intentions to foster greater mutual understanding and knowledge, I can say that these are also challenging times. We recently took stock of the number of Norwegians living in China today, and we found that the numbers to be astonishingly low. We are at the moment just fact-checking this, so the members of the press should not quote me on what I'm saying now, but to us, it seems now like the number of Norwegians living in China are now at the level of 1920. So that is 100 years back. In particular, I find it discouraging that Norwegian students cannot enter China. This has impact both in terms of people-to-people contact, but also in our ability to maintain knowledge and understanding. We need these young and knowledge-thirsty students to meet, to engage, and foster greater mutual understanding, especially now in times with increased international tension. Such contact and knowledge are crucially important. This leads me to my second point. The lack of face-to-face communications weakens our understanding and in-depth analysis. There is a risk of a more misunderstanding and misinterpretation. As a media reality with information and disinformation enhances this negative effect. In that respect, those who thought that increased globalization would make diplomacy redundant have of course now been proven wrong. The role of honest and cool-headed diplomacy has become more profound than ever. My third and final point, and here I would also like to point to the interventions by the Thai ambassador and also by the Pakistani colleague just now about the concrete lessons to learn from the pandemic. In my view, we need to now to learn the lessons of the pandemic in order to prepare us for the next one. We should use the experiences from the COVID-19 pandemic and act to be more responsive next time. At the outset, when the pandemic hit Norway, the Norwegian government introduced the most comprehensive set of measures ever implemented during peacetime, including lockdowns and other strong measures. At that time, it was not possible to state with any certainty the impact of each individual measure would be. As we now have opened up our society, now is also the time to look in the rear window and take lessons. Therefore, we have had 2 reports by an independent commission that have carefully reviewed the authorities' response to the COVID-19 pandemic. Equally, we have an open, vibrant, and public discussion that has addressed the shortcomings and areas where we need to improve. The UN resident coordinator Chatterjee, he mentioned the Sustainable Development Goals and the 3 integrated pillars. The corona pandemic has highlighted the extent to which health is interlinked with other sustainable development goals. Investing in national health systems is expensive, but failing to do so may prove even more costly. The global health is a priority for Norway. It has been in the past decades, and it continues to be so. We firmly support the leading role played by the WHO in coordinating international global health efforts. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Ambassador Brunset, and for your very good comments. And that's absolutely, I mean, we have to work together, and also the student exchanges are so vital. I know there are some students starting to come back, like the Queensland University and Shanghai NYU, but we hope that more and more can come back, particularly from Norway. You talk about this health consultative efforts. I think is extremely important. We have to work together. Absolutely. You mentioned about WHO. We have ex-WHO former chief representative sitting in our audience here. He's from German embassy as well. Now I would like to invite Her Excellency Clary Ferrari and Ambassador of New Zealand to China and Mongolia. You started your ambassadorship in 2018 in China, and prior to that, you were the ambassador to South Korea and also Director General of North Asia in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade, and Director General for Asia Pacific Regional Work before that. So, Ambassador Ferrari, your turn, please.
Thank you, Henry and Mabel, and also Lin Hui Dang. Much of what I would like to talk about focuses very much on interconnectedness and the very granular and new way we've had to look at interconnectedness in the period since COVID began to impact on us. For some, this has resulted in a turning inwards, focus more on domestic supply, and certainly with Russia's invasion of the Ukraine, the impacts have been profound when it comes to commodity prices, food and energy security. Now we're looking at inflation. All of these major headwinds have got so much stronger. But for some, as I say, that's resulted in turning inwards. For most of us, there certainly is a growing awareness of logistical realities, the factors around geography, the bottlenecks in supply chains. As others have said, you know, there's a greater turn from a focus on efficiency in supply chains to now a much greater focus on resilience. You know, we've talked about just-in-time supply. I think now we're dealing with just-in-case supply approaches around logistics. Words like redundancy in supply chains or duplication used to be bad things. Now we're seeing them as something that needs to be a factor within supply chains. So for all of us, I think there's been a changing approach on these issues. But even so, we've learned these lessons in New Zealand, and we have looked and are continuing to work on supply chains, particularly given that we're at the far end of a very long, skinny supply chain from the rest of the world to New Zealand. Even so, though, our primary response has actually been to instead double down in our efforts to keep trade flowing, to keep markets open. And perhaps that's not surprising, not a surprising result to come from a smaller trade-dependent country. But we also can make a strong argument that doubling down in this way actually is a rational policy, not just for smaller countries, but for larger countries as well. The agenda that we've adopted, whether it be bilateral or regional, focused on free trade agreements and other creative approaches to economic integration, has been hyperactive rather than reduced. We've concluded new FTAs, for example, with the United Kingdom. We've also upgraded our free trade agreement with China. We're working on hopefully concluding an agreement with the EU. We're engaging with the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework. We're working with other countries on a climate change and trade agreement, which was concluded, and now we're inviting others to join. And similarly, we're very active in looking at the applications for membership of CPTPP and also the Digital Economic Partnership Agreement expressed by other countries wishing to join these agreements. So we have a very active agenda around seeking to keep economic engagement flowing effectively, fairly and freely at the same time. In addition to these bilateral, plurilateral efforts, for us the priority must remain an effective multilateral trading system in the WTO. And like others, you know, we're heartened by the fact that MC12 met and achieved some significant outcomes last week. That's to be welcomed. We're particularly pleased to see the fish subsidies agreement concluded. Yes, there's still work to be done on some aspects, but we have the framework agreement agreed. This has been something we've been active on as a WTO member for more than 1 decade. Actually, my colleagues tell me we've been active on it for 2 decades. So we're particularly pleased to see it concluded. And of course, the TRIPS waiver, the declaration on response to COVID, extended e-commerce moratorium. But there are a lot of areas that, you know, just to state the obvious, no forward movement was really achieved at the meeting. We've looked particularly at the agricultural trade reform area requiring attention, and if we're going to advance food security and food availability, then agricultural trade reform, particularly around domestic subsidies, will continue to be an extremely important area to work on. Beyond that, of course, sits the gorilla that does still get mentioned, but it's the gorilla of, you know, the fact that we do not have a functioning appellate body at the WTO at the moment, which is impacting more generally on the dispute settlement process. Yes, there are collective efforts to ensure that at the panel stage it can continue to function. And yes, you know, there is an arrangement amongst a number of WTO members in terms of putting in place an ad hoc appellate mechanism. But we need to work on those tough issues around making sure that the dispute settlement body can function again, and also some of those underlying issues that are particularly difficult to deal with around inclusion and effectiveness of functioning of the existing body. Now, I've spoken for too long. I'll just make one final comment. Implementation of norms is absolutely crucial. And again, we can make the case why it's important both for big countries and small countries to have norms around multilateral trading system, and of course, national sovereignty and territorial integrity in the case of Ukraine, absolutely crucial. So I join with other speakers in focusing on the importance of respect and implementation of international norms. Kia ora.
Good. Thank you, Ambassador. Clearly, and your comments about multilateral system is absolutely important. And New Zealand is actually a force in the multilateral trading system that initiated this TPP and the RCEP and DIPA. You know, are one of the key players there. So absolutely, WTO, you are very experienced. We think that we can make more progress on that. So you have, you know, put a new angle, emphasize on the trade and multilateral system. Now, I'd like to invite our next speaker, His Excellency Ambassador Dato Nisha Wang. And you started ambassadorship in China in 2019. And prior to that, you were the Deputy Secretary General for the Bilateral Affairs and Minister of Foreign Affairs, Ambassador of Malaysia to Iran, Deputy Director General of ASEAN Economic Community Division, ASEAN Malaysia National Secretary, and Minister of Foreign Affairs. So, Ambassador, your turn, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Wang. And I thank also and acknowledge the presence of my friend, Ambassador Lin. Thank you very much for taking time from a very busy schedule to join us here. I'd like to thank the CCG for allowing me to share some thoughts on the important issue of global recovery in the post-pandemic period, which is very topical as the world increasingly moves towards endemicity. For Malaysia, we fully opened our borders along with across-the-board easing of restrictions on the 1st of April. Yesterday, we recorded 1,690 cases and no deaths. While all untimely deaths are tragic, I suspect that the latter figure is now on the average, now less than those dying daily from traffic accidents, a phenomenon that is now very much part of everyday lives and whose numbers no longer excite the public imagination. So like many others, Malaysia is learning to live with COVID-19. If we do so, we appreciate that other countries have other and equally legitimate ways of addressing the COVID-19 challenge. Due to the resumption of economic activity, greater consumption and higher commodity prices, the Malaysian economy is expected to grow anywhere from 5.3 to 6.3% this year, higher than the anticipated global growth rate of 3.1%. However, as an open economy, Malaysia is vulnerable to global economic headwinds. Let me continue by stating the obvious. The world has changed since the outbreak of COVID-19, but it has changed very fundamentally not only because of COVID-19, but also because of other events converging in a very narrow period of time, continuing tensions between China and the US, as well as the situation in Ukraine. While we are learning to live with COVID-19, the repercussions of the two other phenomena have yet to unfold. While there are still many unknowns, nonetheless, I believe we know enough to justify thinking about the word mobility in three different ways: mobility of persons, mobility of data, and mobility of the mind. The mobility of persons is intertwined with many other evolving factors: global and national health regulations, the changing structure of the global supply chain, where the present focus is finding the right balance between efficiency and resilience, as well as new corporate business models. At the same time, we now know that in many situations, remote work is a feasible alternative to physical deployments. So companies and employees alike are changing their requirements, priorities, and expectations. I believe that moving forward, experts in mobility management for professionals will be in great demand. The importance of data and the ways in which it influences our lives will increase in the future. For data to be useful and alive, it needs to be mobile. Stationary data is dead and therefore largely useless. But despite the increasing importance of data and the need for it to be addressed by the international community in a fair, transparent, and equitable manner for the benefit of all, it is done only cursorily by the multilateral system. In this regard, I believe that the CCG and Dr. Henry Wang's idea for the establishment of a World Data Organization merits further discussion. Another option to address this issue is to have it parked under an already established international organization such as the WTO. A scoping exercise is required at any rate before a decision is made. The ancient Romans believed that que incipit in mente, everything begins in the mind. I'm quoting the Latin phrase not just because the Italian ambassador is sitting next to me, but there is wisdom in the ancients. The COVID-19 pandemic, geopolitical tensions, and the Ukrainian situation can easily result in a closure of the collective global mind, seeking comfort in one's own, or an imagined past, or an unattainable future. If history teaches us one lesson, it is this: decay and decline come when one closes one's mind to outside developments and influences. More than ever before, we must resist this odious temptation and instead aspire to a greater mobility of the mind. More than ever before, we must aim for a reimagining of the notion of mobility in all its forms and how they interact with one another. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador Li Shuan, and for your comments and good remarks. And you emphasize this mobility of a person, data, and also the people. Of course, it's very, very important. And I think that ASEAN and Asia are also so heavily populated, and then we should have more people mobility to really support the economy growth. And absolutely, you also mentioned about the minds, exchange of the mind. That we cannot stop on that. So your points are very well taken. Thank you again. Now I'd like to invite our next speaker, His Excellency Luka Ferrari, Ambassador of Italy to China, which you have been here since 2019. And of course, you're a career diplomat. Ambassador Ferrari was appointed here in 2019, but before that, you served as Ambassador of Italy in Saudi Arabia, and you posted in Moscow, twice in Washington, D.C., and in Madrid. And also as Minister of Foreign Affairs in Rome, you hold several positions such as Executive Assistant to the Foreign Minister, Director of the Near Eastern Affairs. So many portfolios. Your turn, please, Ambassador Ferrari.
Thank you, President Wang, and thank you, President Lin. Thank you for inviting me to this very important gathering of the CCG. Much has been said at this juncture, and it's really very difficult to add. The topic you've chosen is topical in the current international scenario, and I will try to be brief and focus on three main points. First, I would say that the slump induced by the pandemic has been short-lived in terms of GDP contraction. At the same time, some of its effects will be long-lasting. In 2020, the economic collapse of the global level has been the largest since the Second World War, but the recovery has been relatively quick. After 2 years, trade and foreign direct investment flows have regained the lost ground and hover now above pre-pandemic levels. At the same time, the effects have been very different across sectors. Trade of pharmaceutical products, domestic appliances, and electronics have boomed. Tourism has nosedived. Some of these trends will be short-lived, others will be durable. As the digitalization push induced by the pandemic will redefine for a long time to come the demand of goods and services that are traded internationally. The pandemic has also affected considerably FDIs. Globally, they have surpassed the 2019 levels. However, they are different. In 2021, the greenfield FDIs, which is where an apparent company builds a subsidiary in another country, while greenfield FDI projects are still 22% lower than 2 years ago. This is due to the impact of the reduction of mobility across continents that has affected the powerful engine of economic integration and prosperity across the world. It is even greater in China, where international mobility is severely constrained. These considerations are strictly connected to the second point I wanted to raise, the increasing trends towards deglobalization. The effects of the pandemic have been dramatically compounded by the economic repercussions on the war of Ukraine. As the global supply chains have proved to be highly vulnerable, calls for enhancing resilience through reshoring have increased. These have been further amplified by the lockdowns in Shanghai that has brought about ramifications well beyond China's economy. Reshoring is not considerably materialized yet. At the same time, increases of inventories by companies around the world and diversification of supplies are taking place. Overhauling the model of globalization we have experienced over the last 2 decades is aimed at enhancing security. It will also come with costs that we should take into consideration and be prepared to bear. And here I come to my third point, my last point, the Chinese perspective. China has greatly benefited from globalization and open markets. Trade and FDIs have been extraordinary tools of economic and social development, and so they are still today. In line with the global trends, trade and FDI flows in China have regained steam, and the Chinese economy has rebounded. At the same time, nonetheless, we have to consider the long-term view as well. In this perspective, easing the international travel rules is fundamental to restore pre-pandemic flows of political visits, business exchanges, and students. As my Swiss colleague rightfully pointed out earlier, it is key to attracting and retaining talents, to keep competitiveness and enjoy the tremendous benefits of foreign know-how inside your country. We have really appreciated the commitment of the Chinese authorities to increase the number of international flights over the last week. You mentioned the Prime Minister's personal intervention. Of course, more needs to be done along the same line. Keeping the borders closed for too long could lead China to isolation and bring about long-term social and economic costs that could be entirely avoided if action is taken promptly and in a heavier way. I think we have to put behind us the times of when we used to burn fleets and look beyond and keep integration going, or we will kill globalization. And as far as China is concerned, you will kill the hen with the gold, the goose with the golden eggs. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Ferrari. Your point is really well raised. I think that absolutely, the GDP may suffer a bit, maybe take a year or 2 or 3 to come back, but the psychological scar and impact may be very, very damaging as well. I think particularly these people-to-people exchanges. I'm glad that Italy and China are probably considering opening some more flights. That's good news. And also we hope that the more countries we can continue to do that, so that that really can start the flow of the people. This is really expected. I hope that now the cost of flight coming back from Europe to China, it can be as high as 70,000, 80,000 just for a charter flight and economic seats. Enormous cost. So this is really urgent concerns. Now I'd like to invite our next speaker, His Excellency Dujahari Aritamagam, Ambassador of Indonesia to China and Mongolia. And you started your ambassadorship in 2018. And before that position, you were the senior advisor on strategy issue to the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Indonesia. And also you're ambassador to Russian Federation and Republic of Belarus, and also as a deputy minister for ASEAN cooperation. So Ambassador, your turn, please.
Thank you very much, President Wang, President Lin, Madam Mabel, and also for the CCG for having me today. I'm very pleased to be together with all of your excellencies and also many good friends today. I just finished my quarantine a few weeks ago, 16 days in Chengdu. I was away for almost 5 months. So I can say a little bit about being outside China for a while. I note that this year, China and Globalization Forum has so far been a success and running smoothly. Fellow Excellencies, Ambassador, I'm glad to be able to confirm that overall, the bilateral relations are still strong between Indonesia and your respective countries despite the pandemic. Indonesia bilateral relation with China also continue to grow stronger than ever. Of course, despite these strong relations that we have, the COVID-19 pandemic is not over yet. There are still imbalances in many parts of the world. Global mobility are still limited. Much has been said on that. Therefore, we need to work collectively and stand together to enter the post-pandemic times. I will mention a little bit about our presidency of the G20 this year. Of course, based on that, we choose our theme of recover together, recover stronger is quite relevant. And reviving global mobility plays an important part to achieve an era of post-pandemic times. Allow me to contribute today's roundtable discussion with Indonesia's G20 presidency in responding to create a better global mobility in post-pandemic time. A report entitled COVID-19 and the State of Global Mobility in 2021 by the IOM, published last month, stated that since the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic, countries have sought to prevent the virus spread through a broad array of travel measures. These have included both travel restrictions and health requirements. Government faced challenges of finding the correct policy, timing, and balances to safely restart cross-border mobility of all types. Thus, many of newest rules seek to safely expand the groups who are able to travel or replace blunt entry bans with measures to minimize the risk of virus spreading. Our experiences this past over 2 years provide an opportunity to create a stronger global architecture on mobility and health, which in the long run would both help safely restore travel and migration to pre-pandemic levels, while at the same time better prepare countries for future public health crises. Already we have seen in January till April 2022 that international tourism saw a 182% year-on-year increase, with destination worldwide welcoming an estimated more than 120 million international arrivals compared to 41 million in the first quarter of 2021. Of the extra over 70 million international arrival for the first 3 months, about 47 million were recorded in March. In our case, in May, 1 million. Showing that the recovery in gathering pace. Although international tourism remains 61% below 2019 level, the gradual recovery is expected to continue throughout 2022. As more destinations ease or lift travel restrictions and previously restrained demands are unleashed. As of May this year, 45 destinations had no COVID-19 related restriction in place. In Asia, an increasing number of destinations have started to ease those restrictions. One of them, of course, Indonesia, which will host more than 180 meetings during the presidency of the G20, with the G20 summit be held in Bali, November 22. I was in Bali in March, no tourists there. And then we started to reopen Bali 1st of April. I went back to Bali in April. We saw some tourists. And in May, I went back as well to Bali and already recorded more than 1 million tourists coming to Bali. They're coming from Australia, New Zealand, European countries, Malaysia, Singapore, United States, etc. We do hope that from China will visit us soon. To ensure that all these meetings proceed safely, the government of Indonesia will apply standardized COVID-19 health requirements for traveling for all G20 member delegates. As president of G20, Indonesia realized that no country can recover alone. Pandemic is a global crisis that needs to be handled together. For this, my government put forward the spirit of inclusivity and cooperation to reach global recovery, while at the same time bridging the interests of developed and emerging economies. In order for G20 to deliver and accelerate the recovery, including restore global mobility, we will focus on 3 main pillars during our presidency, namely global health architecture, digital transformation, and sustainable energy transitions. This is based on our assessment on the current situation. Through these pillars, Indonesia will continue to take the lead on ensuring equitable access to COVID-19 vaccine, promoting sustainable and inclusive economic development, in particular to SMEs participation and digital economy, while also maintaining the aspiration to continue to improve our collective capacity in securing the shared prosperity among nations through various reform efforts in global taxation, stronger cooperation in fighting corruption, deepening of infrastructure financing, and pushing for a more democratic and representative international cooperation. Dear friends, excellencies, focusing on global health architecture, digital transformation, and sustainable energy transition are the key response toward the more dynamic global mobility in post-pandemic time. We do hope that Indonesia presidency in G20 cannot succeed without the support from all its members, of course, including China. Both Indonesia and China, and together with G20 members, share the same views on the importance of the 3 pillars mentioned. Lastly, I do hope the current solid collaboration between Indonesia and China could be as well the model for other developing countries' cooperation and also be reflected in the concrete deliverables of this year G20. Terima kasih, xie, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ambassador Tagamen, and very comprehensive. You give a great briefing on the G20 summit that we're going to have in Indonesia this year. It's an excellent opportunity for all the countries to see. Probably going to have a first time the face-to-face G20 and all the leaders, and we may see a turning point in international leadership in combating this COVID-19. And you talk about recovery, health, digital, sustainable development, all those key issues, highly relevant, and we really appreciate your briefing all of us for this important meeting coming up. Now, next, I'd like to invite Ambassador, His Excellency Laurent Billy, Ambassador of France to China. And you've been here since 2019, and before that, you were the Director General for the Global Affairs, Culture, Education, and International Development at French Ministry of
for Europe and Foreign Affairs and G7, G20. So, and also successfully held the position of Ambassador to Thailand, Director Defense Minister, Civilian and Military Office, Ambassador to Turkey, and then to Brazil. So, Ambassador Billy, your turn, please.
Mr. President, dear friends, thanks a lot for the occasion. Although the subject of our meeting has been an ongoing conversation for over 2 years, I think we have now a better understanding of the situation. And the situation is that the virus is not going to disappear anytime soon, and that therefore we have to adapt ourselves and find innovative policies to cope with that reality. First, a word on the war of aggression of Russia toward Ukraine. As you know, President Macron went to Ukraine last week together with German, Italian, and Romanian counterparts to express European unity in the support to Ukraine. Given the global consequences of the war, it is unlikely to imagine a global recovery and mobility without the end of the war in Ukraine. Some likes to blame the sanctions for the current situation. It is quite comfortable to find a scapegoat to avoid fair responsibilities. But it's indeed the war itself which is disrupting global economy, especially the blockade of Ukraine's cereal export. The farm initiative was put forward by the President Macron in this regard. I hope we can have a fruitful discussion with China and also during the meeting organized by the Indonesian G20 presidency. A word on the impact of COVID after 2 years. As we experience, China remains largely closed to visitors. We deeply regret it because it hinders the ability to have a real and meaningful political dialogue between European and Chinese leaders. We regret it because it obstructs cooperation. Flights between our countries are rare. 2% of the pre-pandemic numbers when not cancelled. Cancellation is about 50% on a yearly basis. We are speaking about increasing the number of flights, but if we realize what is on the table, we will be back to 4% of pre-pandemic numbers. And if the same number of circuit breakers continue, we will be still at 2% of the numbers of pre-pandemic. And I will say that the circuit breaker is particularly disrupting. It's usually very discutable case of positive COVID. We have experienced that there is even fake numbers. And it creates a kind of gamble when you want to come back to China, because you're never sure that your plane is actually really going to flight. Not to mention quarantine conditions, which are harsh, unpredictable, especially for family. You were surprised by the numbers that were mentioned about European presence. The French community has dropped of 50% in 10 years, and we expect that it will drop for another 20 to 25% from 22 to 23. So we really need to have good news on that front because the consequences are already very clear. The recent outbreak, and especially so on Shanghai, which is our point of our business community, will have a fatal and long-lasting impact on investment strategy for companies in China. Most of the European firms report a deterioration of the attractiveness of China, both as an investment destination for the headquarters and as an expatriation destination for executive. Without any perspective of improvement, cooperation projects between our companies are under threat. I think it was clearly expressed by my Swiss colleague and friends. So today's roundtable, in that sense, is a very good signal that China is open for discussions and that we have to, our relations remain solid, but we hope that this shared understanding will be followed by measures allowing political, economic, cultural, and human exchanges to thrive again and the long-awaited global recovery to finally arise. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Ambassador Billy. Yes, absolutely. You talk about that today the event that we're having talk about all those how we can learn from each other countries' experience, benefit each other, and then try to really open this international mobility as we hope for. So thank you for your contribution. I apologize. We are delayed a bit of this roundtable. I know Ambassador from EU has to leave, and but he left his open in his written documents. But we actually we have a few ambassadors left. We have a group photo after that. We appreciate all your staying here as well. So, but next I would like to invite Ambassador. You know, the ambassador from Australia. So Ambassador Graham Fletcher, and Ambassador to Australia. So you know, you've been here in China since 2019, and thank you for your coming today. Ambassador Fletcher took up the post here, and also a career of officer at the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, and your most recent role in Canberra, including heading the North Asia division and completing the China-Australia Free Trade Agreement. That's a very big achievement. So, Ambassador Fletcher, your turn, please.
Well, thank you, Dr. Wang, for the invitation. I'll be very brief, just talking about mobility and travel, to give you a couple of points on Australia's experience. For the first 2 years of the pandemic, we adopted a very strict restriction on travel into Australia and out, with compulsory quarantine and numerical caps, which prevented more than a certain number of people arriving each day. Since November last year, those restrictions have almost entirely disappeared. We've been able to do that because the vaccination rate is now over 95% of the adult population, or population over 16. In the meantime, the infection has actually spread to about 30% of our population, about 8 million cases, but only a relatively low death rate of around 9,000. Today, we still have 208,000 cases, but only 3,000 in hospital. So it's actually a manageable situation where there is only a very small number of people requiring medical care, as long as you've got a high vaccination rate. I hope that what we have experienced can also be experienced in other places, including China. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ambassador Fletcher, for updating us for the Australia situation, which it seems doing quite well. And the next, I would like to have Ambassador, His Excellency Darryl Mihelin, Ambassador of Croatia to China. And prior to this role in China, you were at the office of the President of Croatia, advisor to the President of Foreign and European Policy, and Deputy Head of Mission of Embassy to Turkey, Head of the Department for Countries of Latin America, Australia, Oceania, and Minister of Foreign Affairs and European Integration. So thank you for coming. Your turn, please.
Thank you. Thank you, dear Henry. Thank you to the whole of your team in organizing this event. We need more events like this. As last 6 months, I feel more like an ambassador to Chaoyang than an ambassador to China in general. Even going to Shunyi is an adventure. President Lin, thank you for your inspiring speech at the beginning. Basically, as a matter of fact, the last big event I participated was your event, your famous Imperial Springs Forum in December. And you remember we all barely returned to Beijing because of one single case that appeared in Guangzhou. So it's really adventurous here to travel and move out of Chaoyang. But coming back to the topic of the roundtable today, and coming so late in the order of speakers, I'll just mention several points that I would really like to highlight. First and foremost, I think we should all agree that without multilateralism, without multilateral institutions, this world cannot move forward. The spirit of cooperation cannot move forward. And we often hear true multilateralism, this multilateralism. I would say this is a false conversation. The multilateralism that we need is an effective multilateralism with the UN system, with the UN at its heart, with a whole set of international law that this system has established, that in particular smaller countries like my country definitely cherish. And without this system, definitely so many achievements that all of us achieve, smaller countries achieve, would not be there. We should all fight against this notion that might is right, might is not right, law is right. What we see for the last couple of months with the Russian war on Ukraine, basically this is not only Russian war on Ukraine, this is Russian war on Europe. This is with such a wide effects felt all over the world, and this has to be clearly said, is something what's such an assault on the global system, on the system of international law. Coming back to the notion of globalization, and many colleagues mentioned that earlier, globalization has been changing even before the pandemics. There was big discussion about winners and losers of globalization that had some serious consequences in many political systems, particularly in the West, that produced some different electoral results. But quite certain pandemics only accelerated some of the underlying trends and processes that were already there. Globalization was really in an upswing, but like in many processes, pendulum moves into one direction and then starts moving into the other direction. What certainly will be left after these pandemics, I would say that many things will go for the, not only on focusing on the return on your investment and optimization of resources, but there will be certain securitization of many processes. There will be more focus on resilience. So, and I'm quite certain that we'll all have to take that into account. Basically, if we continue with an old motto that was applied, I would say, in fighting pollution and in some other areas, but I think it can be applied to globalization to come. If we continue to think globally, just to continue thinking globally, though acting locally, in some ways, we would be able to preserve the globalization for the better times than to come, and for this pendulum to go further. Coming to the situation here, focusing on the mobility, and here I fully have to underline what my Swiss colleague, Italian colleague, French colleague mentioned in this regard. We are greatly affected ambassadors. We are the biggest supporters of mobility, of people-to-people contact in all the fields, from economy, culture, science, name it, sports, name it. And unfortunately, the pandemic and all the restrictions instigated seriously affect our work here. But it has, what was mentioned as well earlier, it has severe effects on political communication as well, because this cannot be replaced by Zoom meetings for eventuality. People-to-people contacts, informal discussions without anyone else present, sharing meals. Coming from Chinese culture, you know how that is important. Without these discussions now for several years, this kind of interaction, and I don't count in this bubble visits to China, this is not the same thing. Without this, basically, you have this sense of growing apart, and then this sense of growing apart creates such a great grounds for misunderstanding, misinterpretation, miscommunication, and unfortunately, mistrust. This is what we really have to try to overcome, and not going into any countries' domestic policies in fighting the pandemics. Croatia is fully open. This summer, we expect even to have greater number of visitors than in 2019. But this has to be taken into consideration, not only in this forum, but in many, I would say, political considerations here. What are the effects of the domestic policy on the perception that is growing about China in the world, and how this takes further our cooperation with China? I see that my time is up. Okay. So I would stop on that note. Once again, thanking you for the event, and we really have to talk more about many things that you are starting today.
Okay. Thank you, Ambassador Mihalin, and absolutely, I think this roundtable discussion is very important, and we want to gather all the ambassadors' points and also recommendations. Thank you for your contribution. Now I'd like to invite Ambassador Paulo Estevela de Mesquita, Ambassador of Brazil. You started ambassadorship here in 2018, and of course, before that, you were the Undersecretary General for Latin American and Caribbean at Ministry of External Relations, and also worked in the embassy in Rome and Santiago, and Permanent Mission Brazil to WTO and Geneva. So you're also a trade expert, Ambassador de Mesquita. Your turn, please.
Thank you very much, Dr. Wang, Ambassador Lin, Dr. Miao. St. Thomas Aquinas said that there are three things which are necessary for salvation. We should know what to believe, we should know what to desire, and we should know what we have to do. Now, I think that the pandemic has been very humbling about what we should believe. In South America, we had, as mentioned by my Peruvian colleague, we had a very difficult situation. We all took different approaches, and the results were very similar. Now, some countries that did much better in the early stages now are facing many difficulties. The rise of new and more transmissive variants has called into question the cost-benefit analysis of the most restrictive measures. And I think that's something that is clear in China. The pandemic has disrupted people-to-people contacts, it has disrupted businesses, and it has disrupted government-to-government contacts. As several of my colleagues have mentioned, it's impossible to completely substitute people-to-people contacts with Zoom meetings, video conferencing. And the fact that we have such a long interruption in these contacts is bound to have an impact on investment and also on trade, because again, it's not only the investment decisions that cannot be done through Zoom, but even the initial contacts, or when you do not have established trade relationship, it's important to make decisions without getting to know each other. Now, on St. Thomas mentioned that we should know what to desire. I think that if he were alive today, he would update this to the recognition that we do not all desire the same thing. It's normal that we do not all desire the same thing, but we have to understand each other's desires. And the only way we can do this is through discussion. We have to meet, and again, it's not just the business meetings that have been hampered, but also government to government meetings. And we are seeing this at a point when we have an increase in tensions in the international system. Those who have different desires, who have different viewpoints, are not having the exchange the opportunity to exchange and to explain their respective points of view. And finally, the point about knowing what has to be done, what should be done. We all know that we have challenges that can only be addressed collectively. Issues like climate, but also security issues, they have to be addressed collectively. And again, if we do not have the opportunity for these exchanges, we are taking chances that we should not. In the case of Brazil, I will only want to state that Brazil remains committed to an open, transparent, rules-based order. We think that is the only thing that can produce lasting, sustainable development. We, of course, recognize that some of the challenges that we face predate COVID, so multilateralism was already facing some challenges, and it needs to be updated periodically because reality changes. In order to retain the commitment of all countries, rules have to be updated. But then again, Brazil remains committed to working with other countries in fora such as the UN, the WTO, the G20, the BRICS, which will have a summit this week, to ensure that the post-pandemic world remains open to the flow of capital, goods, and people. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Ms. Kita. And so excellent, you mentioned about this importance of the roundtable and how we can really, exchange views, and we have to work together. So I think Brazil is a big BRICS country, and experience is also highly relevant for all of us here as well. Now, as the European ambassador has to leave early, he left his written test. I'll keep that. And I apologize, we went a little behind schedule because your speech was so good, has been really stimulating. But we have prepared also a little light lunch, and we hope that we won't be too long before we close. And but last but not least, we will have Ambassador Osman. He's the permanent representative of African Union to China since 2018. And before that, he occupied the senior government position in Korea, spent over 40 years. Most recently, he served as a permanent representative of Sudan to the United Nations and the Secretary of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And also he was ambassador to Venezuela and Argentina, to Chile and Brazil. So thank you, Ambassador Osman. Your turn, please.
Thank you. First of all, I would like to thank you, Dr. Wang, and your colleague, Dr. Mabel. I also would like to thank Ambassador Song Tian for his inspiring speech. As being the last speaker, I'm not going to repeat what all those which I agree with some and I disagree with some. But generally, it was echoed by all that the COVID-19 pandemic is the most disruptive global event since the Great Depression or the Second World War. Its economic costs are staggering. Much of the world has fallen into recession, debt levels are soaring, and future growth prospects have dimmed. In some ways, it is the first fully global crisis in human history, one from which no country can remain aloof. In other way, it is a revelation in a far more literal sense, which revealed our collective attention on many injustices and weaknesses that already exist in how we live together. If people were oblivious of these faults before, it is hard not to see them now. The pandemic has been a litmus test of global cooperation and support to developing countries, in particular, which remain inadequate. They were severely hit early by the global economic downturn. Their economies are experiencing an unprecedented pressure on their already limited fiscal capacity to tackle urgent public health and social needs. This gloomy picture necessitates a sort of reordering. The major powers need to assume a special responsibility for upgrading and updating the principles, concepts, and institutions for new world order. However, the major obstacle to a smooth transition to a new order include inter alia the policy shift from unilateralism, protectionism, and nationalism, which is the current trend. Just as it takes a coordinated global demand to vanquish the pandemic, it will take complementarity rather than confrontational policies of major powers to ensure a peaceful transition to new world order. The demand for a new world order, economic order, is not something new. It is flagged by the developing countries for decades, since the early 70s. But the big powers didn't heed to their cry. The time is more opportune to embark seriously on readdressing and reaching a new order that addressed the concerns of the developing countries, which was vividly reflected by this pandemic. I thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Osman, and for your final but not least, least but not last, very important speech. I think that African is also very important in this pandemic fighting and also global mobility, and we really have to safeguard the development of Africa, but also no country is safe until everybody is safe. So absolutely important to safeguard all countries from pandemic. Thank you, Ambassador Osman. So we have come almost to the end of our discussion. Thank you all very, very much for staying here. But before we closing, I'd like to have Ambassador Lin to give a little summary to our discussion, which I think all the ambassadors has given very good recommendations, but also some good comments, and we were taking good notes. And here I'd like to have Ambassador Lin to give some summary of our roundtable. Ambassador Lin, please.
谢谢。我是这个非常荣幸，今天有机会回到世界的周围。我刚才听了这个很认真倾听，而且很认真记录了每一位大使阁下的重要观点。有些关于中方面的关切，我也会相信我们会有一定的自己的渠道向政府部门反映。但我想这里要跟大家分享的是，作为大使，我很羡慕大家。大家能成为驻中国的大使，必须是你们国家的精英，而且是全球的精英。所以刚才大家思考的都是站在全球范围，站在两国关系，建设一个更加美好的世界，建设更好的双边关系来思考提出问题的。我认为是上亿的。那么我也当过大使我在非洲担任3任大使，当过非洲司长。那么我们大使驻外使节的共同点就是增进国家之间以及中国本国和世界人民之间相互了解、友谊与互信，它不是别的，是让双边关系更好，让世界更好。那么回到刚才，我想回答2个简要的，因为我现在不代表官方，我已经从官方到民间了，所以我不代表官方，但我嫣然作为一个前任大使曾经当过大使，现在人民外交的这个中国人民外交协会的会长，简要给大家分享2个问题的观点。一个关于清零政策，中国动态清零的政策，这方面可能有很多朋友会有很多误解，或者是有些焦虑或者有更好的期待，我觉得都是可以理解。我跟大家感受是一样，因为我经历过北京的 SARS。我还亲自协助非洲动员中国的力量，支持非洲战胜了埃博拉。我也在南非担任大使的时候，爆发了中国的武汉的危机，我们跟中国人民一起战斗。同样的看到现在全球这个新冠肺炎疫情仍在持续。那么我要想的是什么呢？作为大使，我觉得很重要的要换位思考。换位思考就是什么？你已经在中国，一定要站在中国来思考，为什么中国要实行动态清零政策？中国有14亿人民，占世界人口20%。中国抗疫的成功，就是全人类抗疫的成功，重要做的这一点。第二，中国是人民的党，人民的政府。你看，我们所有的机构都挂上人民，我是中国人民对药协会。他没有了人民，他这个政府和党就没有意义。所以我们始终在抗击疫情过程中，把人民放在第一，把生命放在第一。因为我们习主席要求我们统筹防控、疫情防控和经济社会发展。我要告诉大家的是，中国还是比较成功。中国的成功疫情防控实践告诉我们，新冠肺炎疫情可防、可控、可治。我们在去年非常困难的时期，中国 GDP 实现了8.1%的增长，为全球的经济复苏和发展成为世界经济主要引擎，做出了独特的贡献。你可想象，如果没有中国的生产链、产业链、供应链，世界的经济，特别是我要告诉大家的是，国际社会欠中国人民、中国党一个感恩。我们现在已经成为世界上130多个国家和地区的最大贸易伙伴国。如果我们中国 停止了生产，停止了这个疫情啊，这个停止了一切生产经济活动，全球你可以想象是什么境况。所以呢，我们去年对外国际贸易额增长21.8%，对美国增长21点几，对美国中美贸易增长20%，欧洲也增长20%以上。啊，我们很自豪，你应该说中国成为经济复苏的主要引擎。那么现在关键的问题不是在中国国内，咱们现在我们都一样，你看我不敢出去，或者是不敢出国，我都当了2年多的会长了，我会期待到各5大洲去促进人民的交流，直接面对面。我跟大家一样期待这一天的早日带来，但这一天的到来，我现在明白，必须是全球行动。某个国家健康只是中国成功了，世界如果还是这么做不行，那么就第二个换位思考。如果按照美国的模式、欧洲的模式，或者我们澳大利亚的模式，澳大利亚我注意到你是刚才讲的大使阁下啊，在讲的很成功的经验，但你人口3000万，我们是14亿，那么这个呢？如果按照美国、欧洲的政策，中国现在应该有400万到500万死亡。美国今天有100万死亡，欧洲有200万人死亡。如果按照这种政策，中国应该有400到500万死亡。美国今天有将近9000多万人感染，1/3的人口，或者是1/4多。那么如果按照美国这政策，中国今天医院全爆满了，不会有我们坐在这里，满大街都是病人，中国不可能有生产。中国停止了生产，那么世界也将为此停止，因为中国现在是世界的经济引擎。我想这一个，我要给大家讲的是，大家要共同行动，团结合作，那么一起啊，我们来共同努力实现早日控制住全球，而不是某个国家，也不仅是中国，应该是全世界。这就是中国到今天为什么援助了120多个国家的疫苗和物质援助，我们愿意跟世界各国人民共同战斗。第二个呢，我想回应的一个，应该大家大使阁下在这能感受到你在中国是平安的，是健康的。第二个就是关于我们有些大使提出了全球化很重要一条，要遵守共同的规则，我很赞同。我刚才讲话当中，这个共同的规则是联合国的规则，不是某个国家或者某个人的规则啊。这共同的规则，我们应该说中国的这个国际交往过程中，我觉得中国和世界各国180多个国家都建立了外交关系。我昨天刚刚跟新西兰的这个友协会，前几天跟澳大利亚的友好协会，前几天跟德国的友好城市都搞了视频合作。我们都有一条呢，就是我们关系的给我们一个启示，就是我们国家有不同的社会制度、价值理念、发展阶段，没关系，只要我们相互尊重、平等互利、共同发展，我们就能一起来共同发展。过去是这样，那么未来的全球化，我刚才讲了一句话，就是有个关键词，中国应该是全球化的受益者、推动者，也是建设者。那么中国对21世纪的期待，不仅是中国成功在哪呢？两个关键词，一个是国内实现共同富裕，让所有人民都是成为全球化的受益者。第二呢，是国际上是全球化致力推动我们共同发展，不是你输我赢，而是合作共赢、共同发展。我想，只要我们这种秉持这种共同的理念，基于联合国的 WTO 的共同规则，我们一定能够实现合作共赢、共同发展。谢谢。
Okay, thank you, Ambassador Lin, for your summary, and also you have raised the point. And I think this is actually today. I would like to say that we had a very constructive, very focused on the global mobility, on the global pandemic threats, and also on the global cooperation under the multilateral system. So really appreciate all ambassadors' presence. And I think we have taken very good notes. We'll make a good summary and we'll report to relevant departments as well. So once again, I want to thank all of you and appreciate your coming today. So we'll conclude our roundtable now. I apologize, we ran a bit over a bit time because you have all the excellent points. We have greatly benefit from your discussion and wisdom. So let's conclude now. Let's take a photo and we have a light lunch prepared. Thank you.